Okay, here's a lap guide for Spa for the Camel GT 2017 Season 1 Week 2. Before I go into the lap, here's a lap without commentary. Okay, so going through this a little bit in more detail turn by turn. Let's go to the approach of turn 1. Okay, so break point here is right around the 100 board or a little bit before that. I'll say this once, but it applies for the rest of the lap. What you're going to be doing is backing up your braking points, obviously, from what I'm showing here. This is more of qualifying fuel, but if you're in a race, and especially if you have draft, you're going to be backing these braking points up. So keep that in mind. Don't try to use these braking points at all times. It's going to be subjective to weather as well, so just a reference there. So you'll see me braking there at about that point. And I think I reached it pretty close to 80% braking at that point, and of course just braking in a straight line here. Let's go ahead and go back to cockpit. So braking will begin to trail off here. It doesn't stay at 80% for very long. It hits 80% quickly, and then we'll start to trail off from there. So the objective here is to be off your brakes by the time you reach the apex. I'm aiming for this point of the curb. Sometimes I'll cross into that a little bit, but that's my marker, that's my target. And of course, there's a little bit of trail braking going on here. And as soon as I cross the apex, starting to get back on throttle. Takes a little bit to get back to full throttle. This is actually in first gear right here, so you've got to be extra careful with the throttle. You will spin if you go full throttle too soon. You'll see that I don't quite get to full throttle until I've got the car straightened back up. You can use a little bit more curbing here if you need to, although typically that happens when you've already made a mistake, and of course you can get an off track if you cross that, but you want to avoid that, obviously. All right, so coming up on Eau Rouge, what you're doing here is, I'd say right about here, you're starting to aim for your apex, which is really just right across this curve. you'll see I've got the car set up to really kind of straddle that curbing. So just to take a look at where the car comes across, there is no off track for that. It's not a difficult corner in this car. You can actually adjust your line in a few areas through here. It's pretty simple. I'm actually running wing 5 in this particular setup. Started with wing 6, felt like I could get a little bit more out of it, and so I went to wing 5. I don't know that I'll lower the wing any more than that, but again, still early testing. So wing 5 is what was used for this particular video. So oops. I'll get better at these cameras, dang it. Okay, so this is just gonna play through Eau Rouge here. Don't get up onto the curbing too much here. You can touch it a little bit, but don't want to unsettle the car too much, and you really don't even need to. The car gets through here pretty easily. Using a good amount of the curbing here on the left. Again, just what you're really trying to do is just straighten out the line and lose as little speed as possible. This first set of corners is probably the two of the most important sections of the track, because you'll coming down the Camel Straight up here, you're gonna want to carry as much speed as you can, and there's going to be a fair amount of draft going on, obviously, and so a little mistake here or there can really cost you quite a bit. All right, coming up on turn 5, Lacombe. I'm going to go ahead and show the chase real quickly to show you where the braking point is. Now, I think I typically aim to brake right when, in my vision, I'm seeing the red curbing start. You can see I'm on the brakes just a little before that, but I don't get to full braking until I'm past the first part of the curbing. So that happens pretty quickly there. But let's take a look at it from cockpit, and you'll see where the braking reaches full braking right about there, and of course braking in a straight line. By the time you turn in, you really want to be off the brakes here, because you're in a high-speed corner and heavy braking. If you're carrying too much braking, again, you'll spin as you turn in. So this is a tricky corner to take consistently at the right pace. It takes a bit of practice to get a feel for what that pace is. So I'll be braking and then trailing off until I just about reach the curbing here, and then ideally at that point I'm off the brakes, or just very, very lightly tapping the brakes, using the brake pedal to kind of help steer the car a little bit, and then starting to get back on throttle. Now, any throttle through this set of corners, 6 and 7 coming up here, is pretty minimal. You want to set up for turn 7 up here, so you're going to sacrifice on speed on your corner exit. So real light, and then back on, and then I'm only back to full throttle once I'm feeling pretty comfortable that I'm going to be hitting my mark on the left, which is maybe just a brief touch of the red curb here. So as long as you've set this up right, you should be back to full throttle just after this apex on the right. And you're going to carry your speed, and you can use all of the red curbing here on the left. You want to be back off the red curbing by the time it ends to avoid an off track. Braking marker here is, again, about the start of the red curbing. Again, that's probably the point where you're going to want to reach threshold braking, which is about 70%, I guess, here. Now, I start to move over in the braking zone. You'll see the car's kind of moving gradually to the right. There may be some different lines here that work well for you, depending on your driving style. My main thought as I'm approaching this corner is I want to get the car to the curb by the about the center point, and then I want to hug that a little bit. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily the fastest line. For me, it was the most consistent, and I think I did post some of my best laps with that holding that line there. The other reason you're wanting to kind of stick to the right-hand line is, again, you're sacrificing the exit here because you want to be you want to reach the curbing to the right for the next corner. So you really don't want to run too wide here. So just hugging that line as you reach the center point is just a real simple way to treat that. Talking about inputs, a tiny bit of brake and throttle here, really just using the pedals to kind of help steer or rotate the car, and you'll get a feel for that as you practice it. Getting back on throttle, I don't know that do I get to full throttle here? I think it's just half here. Yeah, not till I'm out, and again, I'm feeling like the car is able to get to the next point that I'm back to full throttle. Now this is something I've done a little bit of experiment with. It's an area where you can really make some mistakes if you do this incorrectly. Ideally, and maybe safest, you wouldn't use any of this red curbing. One of the dangers with using it is that, again, you can unsettle the car, but if you make a last minute move to the curbing and then you turn hard to the left, that'll spin the car. So you've got to be careful with that. So what I tried to do here was I tried to get to the curbing early so that I could straighten the car out. Now that the car is straightened out, let's see how much I'm up on that. About halfway. Yeah, the wheel's about halfway into the red here. Once that car feels like it's straightened back out, with well enough time to get the car, the weight of the car is balanced back out, I guess, and I can start to make my turn into the corner. This is another curve you've got to really be careful with. You actually can get right up here into the I don't know if that's like a concrete in between the dirt and the curb there. You can get up there. I try to just touch the red curbing and actually not get too high on it because it'll unsettle the car there. So, and I don't know that it's going to be any faster. So what you're going to do here is quick brake, 40% brake, and aim for the curbing, touching the curbing just a bit. And then by the time you reach the opposite, you want to be back to the opposite side of the road. You want to be back to full throttle. So, and you can use all of the red curbing here. Don't get up into the green, you will get an off track. And of course, getting off the red curbing by the time it ends. So just watching that one more time here from cockpit view. Okay, Puhan. When you approach this set of corners, what I usually do is I'm in fourth gear here, and I apologize, I haven't been talking gearing a whole lot here. Hopefully it's obvious when watching back the replay. You can actually go up into fifth briefly and then down into fourth. Of course, that's just with the setup that I'm using that I'll share here. If no further setup changes are made, you can keep it up into fourth gear. The braking here is real quick and short, just to kind of help get the car turned in quickly. So just as I'm turning in, a real quick brake, a little less than 50% maybe, and quick turn of the wheel at that point. And what I'm doing as I come around, and again just touching the curbing here, is I'm looking at the point where I can get back to full throttle as soon as I can, obviously without coming across here. And I guess the goal should be to get to full throttle by the time you've kind of straightened it out on this curbing on the right here. Back to full throttle there, and you're going to be full throttle all the way through the rest of the corner from here. This is, from what I found, obviously the fastest way to take the corner. That's about the limit on what you can take there. Probably more than I would like, but there's no off track on that. Let me go back to play that from cockpit view. Back to full throttle and letting the car come over to the right. Trying to keep speed up. You can use as much as this curbing if you need to. You don't typically even need to come up on this unless you feel like you need the space. I tried not to get on this curbing for the braking zone. Again, using the red curbing as a braking marker for as I approach that, about the point where I want to reach threshold brake right there. I think that's between 70 to 80% brake there. Getting off the brakes pretty quickly. This is again another corner where you don't want to be braking too hard as you're turning in. You carry too much speed, and if you brake too late, you can spin here as well. And then through this section, again, just like the prior set of S's, you're just going to do some light throttle inputs to kind of help steer the car. Maybe a little bit of trail braking here and there if needed to help get the car rotated where you need it to be. And then you want to be back to full throttle by the time you reach the curbing here on the right. I went a little wide, maybe a little wider than I typically would there, but I like this as a reference because that's about the limit there on what you can take. So let's see what that looks like. Just again, I guess the goal there would be to get off the curbing by the time it ends there. I'm not sure exactly where the off-track points are everywhere on the track. Just I know that's pretty close to the limit. Now again on this corner, I don't like braking on the curbing, so I brake just to the right of that, and you don't have to brake quite as hard here. You're not going as fast as you are for some of the prior corners. So I think, what was it, 40 to 50% braking. And down into second gear here. Let's see here what this looks like. Yeah, just touching a little of the red curbing there. And you're not going to be able to get back to full throttle until you get back onto the left curbing. You can use all of this, and in fact I suggest using all of it to set up the following corner. What is that? We're on turn 14 and 15 here. So you want to get the car straightened out, use all of the curbing here, and you can actually take this full throttle if it's done just perfectly. In most cases I don't. In most cases I have a real quick lift of the throttle here, and especially with fuel, race fuel, you will have a quick lift. You want your lift of the throttle to be just as you come off the curbing and before you reach the apex to the right. You want to be back to full throttle by the time you reach the apex. So let's take a look at that. So apex being the last part of the red curbing here on the right. You know, don't take too much of that. It'll unsettle the car, and you could get an off track. You can cross over just lightly on the opposite side without an off track. I think what you'll find is that in most cases the lift that you have right here is the amount that you have to lift is to avoid an off track right here. And so you can take it full throttle, like I say. You can in qualifying fuel, and maybe depending on the weather, cooler weather than this. I think this was 89 degree Fahrenheit track temperature. But even in qualifying, you'll probably lift just a little bit, not to get the off track and not to get the lap, not lose the lap from an incident. So let's watch this from cockpit view. All of this is full throttle. Now, the car can get through this set of corners real easily. If anything, you might use a little bit of the curbing just to avoid losing speed. Keep, to straighten out the line as much as you can. So you can use some of the curbing here on the left and the right. All right, so the chicane, the chicane for me is probably by far the most challenging set of corners to hit consistently. It's a set of corners you can very easily lose 3, 4, 5 tenths just from a few minor mistakes. The braking point is about the point where it's kind of hard to see in this lighting actually, but about the point where the wall kind of straightens. There's a little bend, I think, right there in the wall. To me, it's a little bit past the 150. And then before, gosh, I don't know, it's hard to spot. Let's see if I can get a better view, I don't know. At least in this lighting, you can see I'm hitting full braking right around this point. Hard braking, again, a very hard braking zone, carrying a lot of speed at this point, 80% at that point. And when you do your braking in this car, to do it efficiently and to lose the least amount of speed, you want to brake hard initially, and then very quickly start to trail off. But practice that on every corner and find out where the limits are. Listen to the tires, find out what the tires are capable of, and you'll get a feel for how much braking you can do there. So what I do for the chicane, and this isn't one of my faster runs through it. I think this was a tenth or two a little slower than one of my better runs. By the time I reach the first part of the chicane, and I do intend to use all of the curbing here, I want to be off brake and throttle, but I want to carry enough speed up over that by the time I'm kind of crossing that, I can now start to give it just a little bit of gas between the first and the second part of the chicane. Just a tiny bit there. And again, using all of this curbing on the left and kind of a real heavy, you can see how much I've got the wheel turned at this point. You're turning the wheel pretty hard. Real quick, low speed cornering. You want to get the car rotated as quickly as you can to get back on throttle as soon as you can, obviously. And so this is down in first gear again, so it's another area like turn one where you've got to be really, really careful with the throttle. And let's watch that from cockpit. So really not reaching full throttle until about there, and aim to get the car straightened up along the right hand side or even on the curbing. I don't know that I would even suggest using much of this curbing. I'm not sure how much traction you're going to get there. I haven't done a whole lot of heavy accelerating off of that, so you may want to just avoid that altogether to make sure that you're not going to spin under throttle. So you can see I'm actually just touching that just a little. I would probably just avoid it. I don't know for sure how much traction you would have there. So all right, so that's a lap. I will post some links to the setups that I used for this video. Hope you find it helpful. Talk to you later.